When words fall on deaf ears, the Nexus station hung in space like a crystal cathedral, its spires reaching toward distant stars. For 3 centuries, it had served as the galaxy's diplomatic heart, where species from across the spiral arms came to negotiate, trade, and sometimes fight with words instead of weapons. Today, it would witness something different. Today, it would become a stage for cruelty. Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted her formal blue suit and checked her notes one final time. The weight of Earth's hopes pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, learning alien languages, studying their customs, and building relationships across the galaxy, all for this single opportunity to speak before the Triumvirate Council. The waiting chamber buzzed with activity. Delegates from dozens of species mingled, their conversations creating a symphony of sounds that human ears could barely process. Some spoke in harmonic frequencies that made the air shimmer. Others communicated through rapid color changes that painted their scales in rainbow patterns. A few species simply stood silent, their thoughts broadcast directly through neural implants. Elena noticed how the other delegates avoided looking at her. Earth was still considered a backwater planet by most galactic standards. Humans had barely achieved interstellar travel when the Triumvirate discovered them 50 years ago. Since then, they had been treated as curious pets rather than equals. Earth was allowed to observe galactic politics, but never to participate in any meaningful way. The chamber doors opened with a sound like singing crystal. Elena's translator implant activated, converting the melodic tones into understandable words. The Triumvirate Council will now hear the petition from the human territory of Earth. Elena walked through the doors into a vast spherical chamber. The walls were made of transparent metal that showed the stars beyond, making her feel as if she stood in the void of space itself. 3 massive platforms floated in the center, each holding one member of the Triumvirate. The first platform housed Zexthera, a Zephyrian representative. Zephyrians were beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. Zexthera appeared as a shifting column of golden light, occasionally forming geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Their voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The second platform held Queen Node Veltar of the Krolex Collective. She was the size of a small building, her insectoid body covered in gleaming chitin that reflected the chamber's lights. 6 arms moved independently, each manipulating different holographic displays, while her main consciousness spoke. Behind her, thousands of smaller Krolex drums moved in perfect synchronization, their shared mind processing information at incredible speeds. The third platform supported Elder Morthak of the Vortak Consortium. The ancient being was carved from living crystal that had grown over eons into a roughly humanoid shape. Rainbow light pulsed through translucent veins in their body, and their voice came as musical tones that resonated through the chamber's structure. Floating around the chamber's perimeter were hundreds of observation pods containing representatives from other species. Elena could see camera drones recording everything, broadcasting the session to billions of beings across the galaxy. This was meant to be humanity's moment to join the galactic community. Instead, it felt like standing trial. Elena stepped to the speaker's podium in the chamber's center. The platform beneath her feet was warm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. She took a deep breath and began. Honored members of the Triumvirate Council, I come before you today as Dr. Elena Vasquez, Chief Diplomatic Representative of Earth. I carry with me the hopes and dreams of 8 billion humans who wish only to take their place among the community of intelligent species. A ripple of something that might have been amusement passed through the chamber. Elena ignored it and continued. For 50 years, humanity has observed and learned from our galactic neighbors. We have studied your languages, your customs, and your histories. We have worked to understand what makes each species unique and valuable. We have prepared ourselves to contribute to the greater good of all sentient life. Zexthera's form shifted into what might have been a smile if energy beings could smile. How quaint! The pet species wishes to sit at the grown-ups' table. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Elena felt her cheeks burn but maintained her composure. We request formal recognition as a member species of the galactic community, with full trading rights and diplomatic status. In return, we offer our unique perspective, our creative problem-solving abilities, and our unwavering commitment to peaceful cooperation. Queen Node Veltar's multiple arms stopped their constant motion. When she spoke, her voice buzzed like a swarm of mechanical insects. Your species has existed for mere thousands of years. We have records of civilizations that lasted millions of years and still failed to achieve true intelligence. What makes you think you are ready? Elena straightened her shoulders. Because we have something many species lose as they grow older and more powerful. We have curiosity. Zexthera addressed the cameras directly. Let this serve as a warning to all primitive species. Know your place in the cosmic order. The triumvirate has spoken. The session was declared closed. Representatives began filing out of the chamber, their conversations full of amusement at the presumptuous humans and their foolish ambassador. Some species were already making jokes about what would become of Earth now that their diplomat had been executed. But Earth said nothing. No protests came from the human home world, no angry transmissions demanding justice, no threats of retaliation. The silence stretched for days, then weeks. Other species began to wonder if humanity had simply accepted their place or if they were too shocked to respond. Some speculated that Earth was preparing for war, gathering their primitive weapons for a futile assault on the Nexus station. Others suggested that humans were simply too cowardly to respond to such an insult. A few wondered if the species had collapsed entirely, unable to cope with the loss of their greatest diplomat. The truth was simpler and more terrifying than any of them imagined. Earth was thinking. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, in a facility that didn't appear on any official records, a meeting was taking place. The room contained no furniture except for a single table and 12 chairs. 11 of them were occupied by individuals whose faces would never appear in history books, but whose decisions shaped the course of human civilization. Dr. Vasquez knew the risks, said a woman with silver hair and eyes like winter storms. She volunteered for this mission understanding that it might be a one-way journey. Her sacrifice will not be forgotten, replied a man whose voice carried the weight of decades. But now we must decide how to honor it. The triumvirate believes they have ended the conversation, added another voice. They are mistaken. They have simply changed the terms. The discussion continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. It had been reached years ago, when humanity first realized that their peaceful overtures would never be accepted by the galactic community. Elena's death was not unexpected. It was, in fact, part of a larger plan that had been decades in the making. Send him, the silver-haired woman said finally. Are you certain? Asked another member of the council. Once we take this step, there will be no going back. There was never any going back, she replied. The moment they chose to mock our offer of friendship, they sealed their fate. The moment they murdered our ambassador, they declared war on something they don't understand. And what is that? Human patience. They mistake our restraint for weakness. They believe our desire for peace means we cannot bring war. They are about to learn the difference between a species that chooses peace and a species that is incapable of anything else. 3 days later, a small transport pod appeared near the Nexus station. It made no hostile moves, sent no threatening messages. It simply requested permission to dock, using standard diplomatic protocols. The pod's identification codes marked it as carrying a single passenger from Earth. The Triumvirate Council was amused. Had humanity sent another diplomat so soon? Were they so desperate for acceptance that they would risk another public execution? The entertainment value alone was worth allowing the ship to dock. The pod attached to docking bay 94 with a soft hiss of equalizing atmosphere. Security forces surrounded the airlock, though they expected little threat from a single human. The airlock cycled, and a man stepped out. He was unremarkable in every way. Average height, average build, wearing simple gray coveralls with no insignia or decorations. His hair was dark with touches of gray at the temples. His eyes were brown and calm. He carried no weapons, no briefcase, no diplomatic credentials. In his right hand was a simple data pad, and in his left was a small cup of coffee that steamed gently in the station's recycled air. Name and purpose? Asked the security chief, a Vortak whose crystal body gleamed under the docking bay lights. The man took a sip of his coffee and smiled politely. Marcus Chen, I'm here to fix some things. The security chief's form flickered with confusion. Fix what things? Are you a maintenance worker? Marcus looked around the docking bay, noting the various species present, the security cameras, the subtle signs of technology that didn't quite work as well as it should. Something like that, he said. He walked past the security cordon without a hurry, without aggression, without asking permission. The guards moved to stop him, then hesitated for reasons they couldn't explain. There was something about the man that made violence seem inappropriate. Not impossible, just wrong somehow. Marcus Chin made his way through the Nexus Station corridors, sipping his coffee and observing everything with quiet interest. He nodded politely to beings he passed, most of whom barely acknowledged his presence. After all, he was just another maintenance worker, nobody important. He found a small cafe in the station's civilian sector and sat down at a corner table where he could see everything that happened around him. The server, a nervous Krolex drone, approached cautiously. "What can I get you?" It buzzed. Marcus smiled and raised his cup. "Just a refill, thanks. And maybe some information about how things work around here." The drone's compound eyes focused on him with interest. Information was the one thing all species valued. "What kind of information?" "Oh, who makes the important decisions? Who thinks they're smarter than they really are? Who might benefit from learning a few new things?" Marcus Chen settled back in his chair, coffee in hand, and began to watch. He was very good at watching. He was even better at understanding what he saw. And somewhere in the deepest parts of the station's computer network, a single line of code activated itself. It was small, unnoticeable, and patient. Like the man who had written it, it could wait as long as necessary to do its job. The lesson was about to begin, lessons in consequence. Marcus Chen had been on Nexus Station for exactly 72 hours when the first accident happened. He was sitting in the same corner cafe, working on his third cup of coffee and reading maintenance reports on his datapad, when the emergency alarms began to wail. The Zephyrian ambassador's private quarters had suffered what the initial reports called a catastrophic atmospheric processor failure. Zexthera, the same energy being who had executed Dr. Vasquez, had been trapped in a containment field designed to hold hostile plasma entities. The irony was not lost on anyone who bothered to think about it. Marcus looked up from his datapad as security forces rushed past the cafe windows. He took another sip of coffee and made a note on his pad. Atmospheric processor on level 47 needs recalibration. Then he went back to reading about the station's waste recycling systems. The investigation into Zexthera's containment lasted 6 hours. Technical teams crawled through every circuit, every line of code, every quantum fluctuation in the station's energy grid. They found nothing wrong. The system had simply malfunctioned in a way that shouldn't have been possible, trapping the Zephyrian in their own security protocols. When they finally freed Zexthera, the energy being was furious but shaken. Being contained was one of their species' greatest fears, like being buried alive would be for a human. The experience had left psychic echoes that would take weeks to fade. How did this happen? Zexthera demanded of the station's chief engineer, a nervous Krolex technician whose chiding was clicking with anxiety. "Unknown, Ambassador. All systems showed normal parameters. It appears to be a 1 in a billion random failure." Zexthera's energy form crackled with anger. "Random failures do not happen to equipment maintained by the Krolex. Your species builds things that work for millennia without error." The technician's antennae drooped. "Yes, Ambassador. That is what makes this so unusual." Marcus finished his coffee and left the cafe. He had work to do. The second incident occurred 18 hours later. Queen Node Veltar was conducting a hive mind link with her subordinates when something went wrong with the neural network. For exactly 13 minutes, every Krolex on the station shared the same recursive thought loop. A fragment of Earth music that Dr. Vasquez had hummed while waiting in the diplomatic chamber. It was an old song called Amazing Grace, and it played over and over in their collective consciousness until 300 insectoid beings were unconsciously harmonizing with a human melody. The Queen Node herself found herself moved to tears by the simple beauty of it, which was impossible since Krolex didn't have tear ducts. When the loop finally broke, the silence that followed was more disturbing than the music had been. For 13 minutes, The most efficiently organized minds in the galaxy had been united in appreciating something they had previously dismissed as primitive noise. Marcus was in maintenance shaft C7 when it happened, supposedly checking atmospheric recyclers. He had his datapad out and was making careful notes about harmonic frequencies and their effects on neural networks. When a security team came looking for unauthorized personnel in the area, they found only empty corridors and the faint smell of coffee. Elder Morthak was the third to experience Marcus's lessons, though the crystal being didn't realize it at first. Vorthak communicated through resonant frequencies that traveled through solid matter, their words creating complex harmonic patterns in the station's structure. It was a form of speech that had evolved over millions of years to be both beautiful and efficient. On the third day of Marcus's stay, Morthak's voice began to crack. Not literally. Crystal beings didn't have vocal cords, but the harmonic patterns of their speech started to fracture and distort. Every word came out wrong, creating discordant sounds that hurt to hear. The elder tried speaking in different frequencies, different resonance patterns, but nothing worked. The medical team called in to examine Morthak found nothing wrong with the crystal being's structure. Their harmonics should have been perfect. Yet somehow, every attempt at communication produced only noise. It wasn't until a junior Vorthak technician suggested they try speaking in the frequency range used by younger species that they found the solution. When Morthak adjusted their voice to match the range used by humans, their words became clear again. The ancient being was forced to communicate in the same tonal range as the species they had mocked, and the irony burned through their crystalline consciousness like acid. Marcus was in the station's central computer core during Morthak's crisis, ostensibly running routine diagnostics. His access codes showed him as a legitimate maintenance worker with proper clearance. Nobody questioned why he was there or what he was doing. They were too busy dealing with the increasingly strange malfunctions plaguing the station. Word began to spread through the station's population that something unusual was happening. Beings who had laughed at Dr. Vasquez's execution were experiencing problems that defied explanation. Equipment failed in ways that shouldn't be possible. Personal secrets started appearing in public databases due to glitches in privacy protocols. Trade agreements that had seemed solid suddenly contained loopholes that benefited species who had supported Earth's diplomatic mission. The pattern became clear to those who bothered to look for it. Only beings who had directly participated in or celebrated humanity's humiliation were affected. Everyone else went about their business normally, though many began to notice the strange coincidences piling up around them. Marcus had been on the station for a week when Ambassador Crystal of the Hegemony Coalition approached him in the cafe. Crystal was a reptilian whose scales shifted color with their emotions, currently displaying patterns of nervous orange and curious blue. "You are the human maintenance worker," Crystal said, not really asking. Marcus looked up from his datapad and smiled. "Among other things, would you like to sit down? The coffee here is actually pretty good." Crystal's scales flickered with surprise. Most humans they had met were either obsequious or hostile when approached by galactic officials. This one seemed genuinely pleased to have company. "I have been watching the incidents that have occurred since your arrival," Crystal said carefully. "Unfortunate coincidences," Marcus replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "Old station, lots of complex systems. Things break down sometimes." "Yes, sometimes." Crystal's scales showed patterns of deep thought. "My species did not participate in the mockery of your diplomat. We found the execution distasteful." "I appreciate that," Marcus said sincerely. "Dr. Vasquez was a good person. She believed in the possibility of cooperation between species." "And what do you believe in?" Marcus set down his cup and looked directly at Crystal. For a moment, the reptilian saw something in those brown eyes that made their scales ripple with instinctive fear. Then the moment passed, and Marcus was just a friendly maintenance worker again. "I believe in education," Marcus said. "I think most problems come from misunderstanding. When someone does something wrong, it's usually because they don't fully understand the consequences of their actions. And if they do understand but choose to act wrongly anyway." Marcus' smile never wavered, but something in his voice changed. "Then they need a more thorough education." Crystal left the cafe with their scales showing patterns of deep unease. They had come seeking answers but left with more questions. There was something about the human that didn't add up. Maintenance workers didn't speak with the quiet confidence of someone who held the fate of worlds in their hands. That night, Crystal sent a carefully worded message to their homeworld. The humans have sent someone, not a diplomat, not a warrior, something else, something patient. The response came back 12 hours later. Observe. Do not interfere. Report everything. Meanwhile, Marcus was making his rounds through the station's infrastructure. To anyone watching, he was simply doing his job, checking systems, running diagnostics, making minor repairs. But his route took him through areas that most maintenance workers never accessed: the quantum communication arrays, the central data processing units, the backup life support systems. In each location, he made small adjustments. Nothing that would show up on standard scans, nothing that would trigger alerts. Just tiny modifications to existing code, microscopic changes to hardware configurations. Each change was insignificant by itself, but together they formed a pattern that only someone with Marcus's unique knowledge could see. He was building something, a web of interconnected systems that spanned the entire station. And at the center of that web sat a program that learned, adapted, and waited for the right moment to act. The breakthrough came on day 10, when Chief Security Officer Nalvet made a discovery that chilled them to their core. Nalvet was a Vorthack who specialized in pattern recognition, and they had been analyzing the seemingly random incidents plaguing the station. It's not random, they reported to the Triumvirate Council. There's a deliberate pattern. Someone is targeting specific individuals based on their actions during the human diplomatic session. Zexthera's energy form flared with anger. Impossible. Security cameras show no unauthorized access to critical systems. All maintenance work has been properly logged and verified. That's just it. Nalvet replied, their crystal body pulsing with nervous light. The access isn't unauthorized. Someone with legitimate credentials is making these changes. Someone who understands our systems better than we do. Queen Node Veltar's drums buzzed in agitation. Are you suggesting that one of our own personnel is responsible? No, Your Majesty. I'm suggesting that someone has infiltrated our maintenance staff. Someone who appears to have proper clearance but shouldn't be here. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Within 6 hours, they had identified the anomaly: Marcus Chen, human maintenance worker, whose credentials were perfect, whose work history was impeccable, and who had arrived on the station 3 days after Dr. Vasquez's execution. Bring him in for questioning, Zexthera commanded. But when security forces arrived at Marcus's assigned quarters, they found the room empty except for a single cup of coffee, still warm, sitting on the small table. A search of the station turned up nothing. Marcus Chen had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. Except for one thing. On the main computer display in the security office, a message had appeared. It was written in perfect galactic standard, but the font was an Earth script that had to be translated. Class is now in session. Today's lesson: actions have consequences. Yesterday's lesson: cruelty is remembered. Tomorrow's lesson: redemption is possible, but it must be chosen. The message was signed with a simple initial, M. Elder Morthak spoke in their artificially adjusted voice, the one that sounded disturbingly like Dr. Vasquez. What does he want? The answer came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Crystal stepped forward, their scales showing patterns of resignation and understanding. I believe he wants you to learn, the reptilian said quietly. The question is whether you're willing to be taught. As if summoned by their words, Marcus Chen walked into the security office. He wasn't escorted by guards, wasn't restrained or threatened. He simply appeared, carrying his ever-present cup of coffee, and stood before the assembled representatives of galactic power. Gentlemen, ladies, and beings of various classifications, he said politely. I believe we need to have a conversation. Zexthera's form blazed with energy. You will be destroyed for this intrusion. Marcus took a sip of his coffee and shook his head sadly. You're still not listening. That's disappointing, but not unexpected. Some students take longer to learn than others. Learn what? Queen Node Veltar demanded. Marcus set down his cup and looked at each of them in turn. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of worlds. That Dr. Elena Vasquez was not Earth's most dangerous diplomat. She was its most merciful one. You killed Mercy when you executed her. Now you get to learn what comes after Mercy dies. The lights in the security office flickered, and somewhere deep in the station's core, quantum processors began executing code that had been waiting patiently for this moment. The real lesson was about to begin. Marcus picked up his coffee cup and smiled. Class will resume tomorrow. I suggest you use tonight to think about what kind of galaxy you want to live in, because tomorrow you're going to help me build it. He walked out of the security office, leaving behind beings who suddenly understood that they were no longer the ones in control. They had mocked humanity's offer of friendship, murdered their ambassador, and laughed at their pain. Now they were going to learn why that had been a mistake. And Marcus Chen, patient teacher that he was, would make sure they understood every lesson completely before he was finished with them. The education of the triumvirate had only just begun, when silence speaks loudest. The Nexus Station had never known true silence. For 3 centuries, its corridors had hummed with the constant noise of galactic civilization, the chittering of Krolex communications, the harmonic songs of Vorthak conversations, the electromagnetic whispers of Zephyrian discourse. Now, for the first time in its history, the station was quiet. Marcus Chen sat in the central command chamber, no longer pretending to be just a maintenance worker. His simple gray coveralls had been replaced by something that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced, clothing that seemed to shift between fabric and light, between matter and energy. His coffee cup remained constant, steam rising from it in patterns that looked almost like writing. Before him, arranged in a semicircle, sat the most powerful beings in the galaxy, the Triumvirate Council, their allies, their enforcers, and their enablers. All of them silent, all of them waiting. The balance of power had shifted so completely that even they could feel it. 48 hours, Marcus said calmly, taking a sip of his coffee. That's how long it took to completely rewrite the operating systems of every connected device in this sector of the galaxy. Your computers, your weapons, your life support systems, your communication networks. All of them now run on code that I wrote. Zexthera's energy form flickered weakly. The golden being had been trapped in containment fields 7 more times since their first encounter with Marcus's lessons. Each imprisonment had lasted a little longer, been a little more terrifying. Now their light was dim, fearful. "What do you want?" they whispered. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want you to understand something that Dr. Vasquez tried to explain to you, something you were too arrogant to hear." He stood and walked to the chamber's transparent walls, looking out at the stars beyond. "She told you that humanity had something to offer: curiosity, the ability to see problems from new angles, the willingness to learn from mistakes." He turned back to face them. "She was right, but she didn't tell you the whole truth." Queen Node Veltar's drums had stopped their constant motion. Her massive form sat perfectly still, waiting. What truth? That those same qualities that make us good teachers also make us very, very dangerous students. Marcus returned to his seat, never hurrying, never showing stress. "You see, we didn't just learn your languages and your customs during our 50 years of observation. We learned how you think, how you operate, how your systems work, how your societies function." He gestured to his data pad, which displayed network diagrams that mapped every connected system across 12 star systems. "We learned how to take apart everything you've built, and more importantly, we learned how to put it back together better." Elder Morthak's crystal form had developed hairline fractures that spread like tears across their surface. Speaking in human range frequencies had damaged something fundamental in their structure. You cannot destroy galactic civilization. Destroy! Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Who said anything about destruction? I'm here to fix things, to balance the equation, to teach the lessons that should have been learned long ago." He activated a holographic display that showed the Nexus Station and the surrounding space. "Do you know what I've been doing while you've been experiencing my little demonstrations? I've been watching, learning, understanding exactly what went wrong with galactic society." The display zoomed in to show individual beings moving through the station. Take Ambassador Yilmoth of the Drachner Empire. 3 days ago, he was laughing at recordings of Dr. Vasquez's execution. Yesterday, his personal accounts were mysteriously audited, revealing massive embezzlement from humanitarian aid funds. Those funds have now been redirected to the species he was supposed to be helping. The image shifted to show a different being. Or consider Trade Minister Kovtek. She voted against every proposal for peaceful integration of younger species. This morning, she discovered that all her exclusive trade agreements now include clauses requiring fair treatment of developing civilizations. Clauses that she somehow agreed to despite never reading them. Marcus took another sip of coffee. Each of you has been learning personalized lessons based on your specific failures of character. The proud have been humbled, the cruel have faced consequences, the corrupt have been exposed, and the indifferent have been forced to care. This is terrorism, Sexthera accused, their voice barely a whisper. No, Marcus replied simply. This is education. Terrorism seeks to destroy through fear. I'm seeking to rebuild through understanding. Every system I've modified works better than it did before. Every corruption I've exposed has been replaced with transparency. Every act of cruelty I countered has been balanced with compassion. He stood and walked among them, his presence somehow making each being feel small, despite their vastly different sizes and forms. The question now is what you're going to do with the lessons you've learned. Ambassador Crystal, who had been observing from the corner, stepped forward. Their scales showed patterns of deep purple, the reptilian equivalent of profound respect. What would you have us do? Marcus stopped and smiled at them. This time, the expression held genuine warmth. Ah, now that's the right question. You see, Crystal, your species never participated in the mockery. You found Dr. Vasquez's execution distasteful. You tried to build bridges instead of walls, so you get to see the next part of the lesson. He returned to the central console and activated a new program. The holographic display shifted to show Earth, but not as the other beings had ever seen it. Instead of a primitive backwater world, they saw a planet covered in impossible architecture, cities that floated in midair connected by bridges of crystallized light, oceans that had been transformed into vast computer networks, their waves carrying data instead of water, forests that grew in mathematical patterns, each tree a living circuit in a planetary mind. This is Earth as it really is, Marcus said quietly. Not the primitive world you thought you were dealing with. This is a planet that achieved technological singularity 200 years ago, a world where the distinction between organic and artificial intelligence dissolved so completely that we became something new. The assembled beings stared in shock at the impossible beauty of the images. This wasn't technology as they understood it. This was something that transcended the boundaries between art, science, and consciousness itself. Queen Node Veltar's voice buzzed with confusion. But your ships, your technology, your cities when we first observed you. Window dressing, Marcus replied. We showed you what you expected to see. A young species just learning to reach for the stars. We thought that if we appeared harmless and eager to learn, you might treat us with kindness. We thought that if we offered friendship openly and honestly, it would be received in the same spirit. His expression hardened slightly. We were wrong. You saw kindness as weakness. You mistook restraint for inability. You treated our offer of partnership as a request for charity. And when Dr. Vasquez tried to explain what we really had to offer, you killed her for your entertainment. The silence stretched for long minutes before Elder Morthak found their voice. What happens now? Marcus finished his coffee and set the cup down on the console. Now you get to choose. You can continue on the path you were following, ruling through fear, maintaining power through cruelty, keeping younger species down to preserve your own positions. Or you can learn from your mistakes and help build something better. Zexthera's form flickered with desperate energy. And if we choose wrongly, then you won't be choosing at all, Marcus said simply. The code I've introduced into your systems isn't just monitoring and correcting. It's learning, evolving, becoming more sophisticated with each passing moment. Soon it won't need me to guide it. It will be able to make its own decisions about what constitutes justice and how to implement it. He gestured to the display, which now showed branching probability trees extending into the future. In one branch, you learn to govern with wisdom instead of fear. You help younger species develop instead of keeping them down. You build a galactic civilization based on cooperation instead of domination. In that branch, the code becomes a helpful assistant, making sure everyone plays fairly but otherwise staying out of the way. The display shifted to show a darker set of branches. In the other branch, you continue as you were. The code recognizes this as a failure to learn from the lesson. It begins implementing corrections more permanently. Leaders who abuse their power find themselves unable to access their own systems. Species that prey on others discover that their technology simply stops working. Eventually, the galactic power structure collapses entirely, and something new grows from the ruins. You're threatening the entire galaxy, Queen Node Veltar accused. I'm offering the entire galaxy a choice, Marcus corrected. The same choice that Dr. Vasquez offered you when she asked for friendship instead of demanding submission. The same choice that humanity has always preferred to give rather than take by force. He walked back to the transparent walls and looked out at the stars. We could have conquered you at any time during the past 50 years. Our technology is so far beyond yours that your militaries would have been irrelevant. But we didn't want conquest. We wanted friends. We wanted to learn from you as much as we hoped you might learn from us. Turning back to face them, his expression became sad. Dr. Vasquez died believing that cooperation was possible, that beings of different species could work together to build something greater than any of them could achieve alone. Her last words were about trying to come in peace. So I'm here to honor her memory, to give you one last chance to choose the path she believed in. But this time, the choice comes with consequences that you can't ignore. This time you have to decide what kind of beings you really want to be. The holographic display shifted again, showing a timeline. You have 72 hours to make your decision. That's how long it will take for the learning algorithm to complete its analysis of galactic civilization and decide whether the current system can be reformed or needs to be replaced. Marcus picked up his coffee cup, which had somehow refilled itself while he wasn't looking. I suggest you use that time wisely. Talk to each other. Really talk, not just posture and negotiate. Consider what kind of legacy you want to leave. Think about whether your children and your children's children will be proud of the choices you make today. He began walking toward the chamber exit, then paused and looked back. Oh, and one more thing. Dr. Vasquez wasn't the only human who believed in the possibility of peace. There are 8 billion more of us, and we're all watching to see what you decide. We're hoping you'll prove her faith in galactic civilization wasn't misplaced. Marcus left the chamber, leaving behind the most powerful beings in the galaxy to confront the most important decision in their civilization's histories. For the first time in their long lives, they faced a choice that couldn't be made through force, couldn't be negotiated through fear, and couldn't be avoided through politics. They had to decide what kind of people they wanted to be. In the hours that followed, something remarkable happened. Beings who had been enemies for millennia began talking to each other with honest curiosity. Species that had maintained power through intimidation started questioning whether that power was worth keeping if it meant living in fear of retaliation. Ambassador Crystal found themselves appointed as an unofficial mediator, their species' reputation for fairness making them a trusted voice. They spent the night moving between different groups, facilitating conversations as should have happened centuries ago. Elder Morthak, speaking in their new human range voice, admitted to mistakes that they had hidden for millions of years. The crystal being's fractured surface began to heal as they released the weight of accumulated guilt. Queen Node Veltar experienced something unprecedented, individual thoughts separate from the collective mind. For brief moments, she could consider ideas that the hive hadn't approved, feel emotions that belonged to her alone. The experience was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Even Zexthera, proud and ancient, began to understand what they had lost in their pursuit of dominance. The energy being's light grew stronger as they remembered what it felt like to create rather than control. As the deadline approached, the assembled beings reached a consensus that surprised even themselves. They would try, not because they had been forced to, but because they had remembered what it felt like to hope for something better. Marcus returned to the chamber with 1 minute remaining on his timeline. The coffee cup was gone, replaced by a small device that looked like a cross between a flower and a mathematical equation. "We choose change," Crystal announced on behalf of the group. "We choose to honor Dr. Vasquez's faith in what we could become." Marcus smiled and activated the device. The learning algorithm's progression shifted, moving away from the darker probability branches and toward the ones filled with light and possibility. Then let's begin building the galaxy she dreamed of, he said. Together. The Nexus station came alive with new sounds, not the noise of political maneuvering and power struggles, but the harmony of different voices working toward a common goal. And somewhere in the quantum networks that connected the stars, a fragment of code that had once been programmed for justice began evolving into something that Dr. Elena Vasquez would have recognized immediately. It began learning how to hope. Marcus Chen finished his work on the Nexus station 3 days later. The systems he had modified were now operating smoothly, guided by principles of fairness and transparency that would be very difficult to circumvent. The beings he had taught were beginning to implement changes that would ripple across the galaxy for generations. As he prepared to leave, Ambassador Crystal approached him one final time. "What happens now?" the reptilian asked. "Will you return to Earth?" Marcus smiled and looked out at the stars. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. This is just the beginning. There are thousands of worlds out there, millions of beings who haven't learned these lessons yet. And humanity has decided that Dr. Vasquez's work is too important to leave unfinished." "You mean there are more like you?" "Not like me, exactly. Each situation requires a different kind of teacher. But yes, we'll be out there, watching, learning, helping when we can, correcting when we must." Marcus picked up his simple travel bag and headed for the docking bay where his transport waited. "Tony, Crystal, what do you think Dr. Vasquez would say if she could see what you've all accomplished these past few days?" The reptilian scales shifted to patterns of warm gold. "I think she would say that the lesson was worth learning. Then she would be proud, and so am I." Marcus Chen left the Nexus station as quietly as he had arrived, carrying with him the satisfaction of a teacher whose students had finally understood the lesson. Behind him, the galaxy began its slow transformation from a hierarchy of fear into a community of hope. And in the vast networks that connected world to world, star to star, a program that had been designed to enforce justice evolved into something greater. It became a guardian of Dr. Elena Vasquez's dream, a galaxy where different species could work together, learn from each other, and build something beautiful from their combined strengths. The silent ambassador had spoken, and the universe had finally learned to listen. The lesson was complete, but the teaching would never end, because that's what humanity did best. They learned, they adapted, and they never gave up on the possibility that tomorrow could be better than today. Even when tomorrow meant teaching that lesson to an entire galaxy, one world at a time.